Imagine staring at a digital clock on your nightstand. The room is completely dark. The red numbers glow against the black plastic. The time reads 3 in the morning. You close your eyes. You squeeze your eyelids together. You order your brain to shut down. You focus on taking deep breaths. You adjust your pillow. You flip the blanket off your legs, then pull it back up to your chin. You try to clear your mind. You try. What happens next? Your heart pounds against your ribs. Sweat forms on your forehead. Your muscles tighten in your neck and shoulders. Your mind races through every mistake you made during the day, analyzing conversations from 10 years ago. The harder you force sleep, the more awake your brain becomes. We learn a specific equation from childhood. Effort equals results. If you want a heavy stone to move, you push it. If you want the stone to move fast, you push it with more force. We assume this physical rule applies to our emotions, our relationships, and our minds. But human psychology does not operate like a rock on a dirt path. When you apply blunt force to an internal desire, the equation breaks. If you try with massive effort to be happy, you become hyper-aware of your current misery. If you try with obsession to make someone love you, your desperation drives them away. If you try to command your mind to stop worrying, your worry multiplies. The expectation dictates that pushing forward moves you forward. The reality proves that in the most critical areas of life, pushing forward throws you backward. Chapter 1. The quicksand paradox. Let us look at survival to understand how this mechanism works in nature. Picture a hiker walking alone near a riverbank. The ground looks solid, covered in a thin layer of dry dirt. He takes a step. His boot breaks the surface. Mud swallows his ankle. He shifts his weight to his other leg to pull himself out, but that foot sinks too. Within seconds, thick, wet sand encases him up to his knees. His chest tightens. His breathing turns shallow and jagged. Panic floods his nervous system. Instinct takes over. He does what society trains him to do when faced with an obstacle. He fights. He pulls his leg up with all his raw strength. He thrashes his arms. He twists his torso side to side, desperate to break the grip. With every violent movement, he sinks deeper. The mud reaches his thighs, then his waist. This scene represents the physical manifestation of toxic effort. Let us examine the actual science of this trap. Quicksand is a non-Newtonian fluid, which means it acts as both a solid and a liquid depending on the force applied to it. When left undisturbed, friction holds the sand grains together. When the hiker steps on it, his body weight disrupts the friction and the sand liquefies. Why does pulling your leg out make the situation worse? When you pull your foot upward, you create a vacuum underneath your boot. The sand and water sediment become dense. To yank just 1 foot straight out of quicksand at a speed of 1 centimeter per second requires around 100,000 newtons of force. That is the exact amount of mechanical force required to lift a medium-sized car off the ground. You cannot win that fight with muscle alone. Yet here is the profound truth of the situation. A human body has a density of about 1 gram per cubic centimeter. Quicksand has a density of about 2 grams per cubic centimeter. Because the human body is far less dense than the quicksand, it is physically impossible for a person to sink under the surface. The math guarantees your survival. If you stop thrashing, stop fighting, and lean back, your body will float on the surface of the mud. The quicksand does not kill the hiker. The hiker's own desperate effort pulls him down. We can translate this physics lesson to human psychology. We live in a culture built on the concept of struggle. We celebrate the daily grind. We glorify the person who sleeps 3 hours a night, who forces their way through exhaustion, who attacks every problem with clenched teeth and white knuckles. We treat every internal emotional obstacle like a physical barrier that we must smash with a hammer. Much of life operates exactly like quicksand. The British philosopher Alan Watts observed this phenomenon and gave it a name: the backwards law. Watts explained that the more you pursue a feeling or an experience, the more you achieve the exact opposite of what you want. He noted that when you try to stay on the surface of the water, you sink. But when you let yourself sink, you float. When you try to hold your breath, you lose it. Think about the feeling of forgetting a name. The name sits on the tip of your tongue. You squeeze your eyes shut. You scour your memory. You strain your brain to find the word. The harder you force your memory to retrieve the name, the further the name hides in the shadows of your mind. You give up. You walk into the kitchen to pour a glass of water. Your mind relaxes, and suddenly the name pops into your head without any effort at all. That is the backwards law operating in real time. The backwards law dictates that the desire for a positive experience is, in itself, a negative experience. The effort highlights what you lack. The harder you try to feel wealthy, the more impoverished and unworthy you feel, regardless of how much money sits in your bank account. You fixate on the gap between where you are and where you want to be. The more you try to guarantee absolute security in your life, the more anxious and insecure you become about losing what little you have. The frantic pursuit reinforces the lack. Let us look at how this destroys our peace of mind on a biological level. Decades ago, an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl made a fascinating discovery. Frankl survived the horrors of multiple concentration camps and spent his career studying human suffering, anxiety, and resilience. He noticed a brutal cycle in his patients who suffered from severe insomnia. When nighttime approached, these patients felt their stomachs knot. Their palms grew sweaty. They stared at their beds with dread. They wanted sleep with such intense desire that they treated sleep like a grueling task. They lay under the covers and exerted immense cognitive effort to lose consciousness. They monitored their own breathing. They checked the clock every 10 minutes. They became angry at their own brains for staying awake. Frankl developed a clinical treatment he called paradoxical intention. He instructed his patients to do the exact opposite of their goal. He told them to go to bed, keep their eyes wide open, and try with all their might to stay awake for as long as possible. He told them to embrace the insomnia. The results were startling. By trying to stay awake, the patients eliminated the pressure to perform. They stopped forcing the outcome. Modern research backs this up. A 2021 meta-analysis of sleep studies confirmed that paradoxical intention improves sleep symptoms. By instructing patients to abandon voluntary sleep effort, their sleep performance anxiety vanishes, and they fall asleep much faster. Another study from 1984 showed that paradoxical intention rapidly reduces the time it takes to fall asleep and maximizes total sleep time. The cure for the problem was abandoning the desperate desire to solve it. This brings us to the core solution for your own life, the art of the step back. You must learn to decouple progress from struggle. When you find yourself in a mental trap, when your jaw clenches, your breathing turns shallow, and you feel a rising panic to control a situation, you must recognize that you have stepped into quicksand. More force will not save you. You must stop thrashing. If you feel lonely and desperate for a relationship, stop attending events with the frantic goal of finding a partner. That desperate energy repels connection. Lean back. Accept the loneliness. When you accept the negative experience of being alone, you stop broadcasting desperation. You become comfortable, and that comfort attracts people to you. If you feel overwhelmed by negative thoughts, do not argue with them. Do not try to suppress them. Fighting a negative thought gives it energy. It validates the threat. Instead, let the thought exist. Watch it. Accept that it is there. Without your active resistance to feed it, the thought loses its power and dissolves on its own. Whenever you face an emotional or psychological block, check your physical posture. Are you leaning forward, tense and aggressive? Or can you drop your shoulders, lean back, and let the environment carry you. The answer to your deepest frustrations is rarely more effort. The answer is less, but letting go of the struggle is not just a neat philosophical trick. What if your problem is not just your mindset? What if there is a hardwired biological limit to how much try your brain can handle before it short-circuits? There is a scientific threshold where effort literally turns against you, shutting down your cognitive function. Chapter 2. The Science of Too Much. You spend 3 weeks preparing for a major presentation. You memorize every data point on every slide. You practice in front of your bathroom mirror until your delivery is flawless. You walk into the boardroom, plug in your laptop, and look at the faces of the executives staring back at you. You open your mouth to speak. Nothing happens. Your throat tightens. A cold sweat breaks out on the back of your neck. Your hands tremble slightly against the smooth wood of the conference table. Your mind, which just an hour ago held a brilliant symphony of information, suddenly feels like a blank sheet of white paper. You stutter. You forget the name of your own project. You stare at the screen, hoping the words will magically pull the lost memories back into your brain. The expectation is that the more importance you place on an event, the sharper your brain will perform. The reality is that treating an event like a life-or-death situation actively triggers a biological shutdown sequence in your nervous system, erasing your competence exactly when you need it most. We are taught that caring more equals better results. If you want to nail the job interview, you need to hype yourself up, remind yourself of the high stakes, and pump your mind full of adrenaline. But your biology strongly disagrees with this strategy. There is a hidden threshold inside your mind where effort stops being an accelerator and turns into a brick wall. To understand why your brain betrays you when the stakes are highest, we have to look back to a laboratory more than a century ago. In 1908, two psychologists named Robert Yerkes and John Dodson conducted a series of experiments to understand how stress affects learning and performance. They placed Japanese dancing mice into a simple maze. The maze featured two options, a white box and a black box. If the mouse entered the white box, it received a mild electric shock. If it entered the black box, it received no shock and was safe. The researchers wanted to see how quickly the mice could learn to memorize the safe route and avoid the dangerous one. The researchers controlled the intensity of the electric shock to measure how the level of stress impacted the learning speed of the mice. First, they used a very weak shock. When the mice entered the wrong box and felt the tiny zap, they were barely bothered. They wandered around aimlessly. Because the consequence was so small, they lacked the motivation to figure out the puzzle. Their learning was incredibly slow. Next, Yerkes and Dodson cranked the voltage up to a medium level. The shock was uncomfortable, but not damaging. This time, the mice became highly alert. They moved with purpose. They quickly mapped out the environment, recognized the pattern, and learned to choose the black box in record time. A moderate amount of stress created optimal focus. Then, the researchers made a logical assumption that most of us make today. If a little stress made them learn fast, a lot of stress should make them learn instantly. They turned the voltage up to a high, severe level. The result completely shattered the standard assumption about effort and performance. When faced with high-voltage shocks, the mice did not become hyper-focused geniuses. Instead, they panicked. They ran in erratic circles. They thrashed around the enclosure. The intense pressure destroyed their ability to recognize patterns. The mice receiving the highest shocks took far longer to learn the correct path than the mice receiving the medium shocks. This discovery became known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. It is often mapped out as an inverted U-curve. The law states that for complex or unfamiliar tasks, your performance improves as your mental arousal increases, but only up to a very specific point. Once you cross the peak of that curve, any additional stress, pressure, or effort causes your performance to plummet. When you sit in your living room and casually practice your presentation, your arousal level sits right at the top of that curve. You feel a mild, healthy pressure to get it right. Your brain functions beautifully, but when you step into the actual boardroom, the perceived stakes skyrocket. You tell yourself, if I mess this up, my career is over. You push your internal voltage to the absolute maximum. You cross the peak of the curve. Your brain goes into a panic state, and just like the mice thrashing in the maze, you lose the ability to perform basic cognitive functions. The solution to this problem is not to try harder. The solution is to actively lower the stakes. You must implement the dimmer switch strategy. When facing a high-pressure scenario, a critical exam, a crucial negotiation, or a difficult conversation with a partner, your instinct will be to treat it like a monumental event. You must do the opposite. You must manually dial down the perceived importance of the outcome. Remind yourself of the vastness of your life outside this single moment. Tell yourself that this is just a practice run. By deliberately reducing the emotional weight of the task, you pull your nervous system backward along the curve, away from the zone of panic and back into the zone of optimal performance. But what exactly is happening inside your skull when you cross that peak? Why does your mind go completely blank? To answer this, we must examine the anatomy of choking under pressure. Consider a star basketball player standing at the free throw line in the final 2 seconds of a championship game. He has practiced this exact shot tens of thousands of times. His muscles know exactly how much force to apply. The hoop is exactly 10 feet off the ground, just like it is in his practice gym. He bounces the ball. He bends his knees. He releases the shot. The ball completely misses the rim, hitting the backboard with a loud, hollow thud. He choked. We often view choking as a character flaw, a sign of weakness, or a lack of preparation. Modern neuroscience reveals that choking is actually a fierce neurochemical disruption. Dr. Sian Bylock, a cognitive scientist who has conducted extensive research on human performance at the University of Chicago, has mapped out exactly why brilliant people suddenly become incompetent under pressure. It all comes down to a piece of mental machinery called working memory. Think of working memory as your brain's temporary scratch pad. It is located in the prefrontal cortex, the area of your brain situated right behind your forehead. When you are solving a math problem, crafting a sentence, or planning your next physical movement, your working memory holds all the relevant pieces of information in place so you can manipulate them. However, your working memory has a strictly limited capacity. It can only hold a few items at a time. When you enter a high-pressure situation, a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala detects a threat. The amygdala does not know the difference between the threat of a looming deadline and the threat of a physical predator. It simply senses danger and floods your brain with stress hormones. Research shows that this chemical flood severely disrupts the prefrontal cortex. In fact, studies have demonstrated that extreme stress can reduce prefrontal cortex activity by up to 50%. Suddenly, your mental scratch pad shrinks, but it gets worse. Those intense feelings of worry, thoughts like, "What if I fail?" or "Everyone is judging me," require mental bandwidth. Those anxious thoughts rush in and occupy the remaining space on your mental scratch pad. If your working memory is entirely filled with worries about failing, there is absolutely zero space left to hold the information you actually need for the task. This is why you forget the answer to an exam question you studied the night before. The information is still stored in your long-term memory, but your prefrontal cortex is so overwhelmed by the chemical storm of panic that it cannot access the files. Your brain is quite literally paralyzed by its own analysis. This leads to a fascinating and tragic paradox. The people who are most susceptible to choking under pressure are often the highest achievers. Highly intelligent individuals normally rely on their massive working memory capacity to solve complex problems. They are used to outthinking their environment. But when the pressure spikes and their working memory gets hijacked by anxiety, they lose their primary weapon. They suddenly perform no better than someone who barely prepared at all. To survive this neurochemical hijacking, you must use the externalization technique. You cannot simply command your brain to stop worrying because fighting the worry requires even more working memory. Instead, you must empty the scratch pad manually. Before a high-stress event, take a physical piece of paper and write down every single fear, anxiety, and worst-case scenario bouncing around in your head. By physically writing the worries down, you remove them from your active working memory. You dump the files out of your prefrontal cortex onto the paper, freeing up the mental bandwidth you need to actually execute the task. Even if you manage to clear your mind, you still have to deal with the physical rebellion of your own body. Imagine sitting down to sign a major contract or trying to thread a needle while someone watches you, or pouring a glass of water during a tense first date. You want your hands to be perfectly steady. You concentrate on holding your fingers completely still. Yet, your hand shakes violently. The water spills over the rim of the glass. You grip the pen tighter, squeezing the plastic until your knuckles turn white, but the shaking only becomes more aggressive. When you try to force physical precision under pressure, your body fights back. This is driven by your sympathetic nervous system, the biological network responsible for your fight or flight response. When you care too much about an outcome, your brain signals the sympathetic nervous system to prepare for a fight for survival. Your heart rate accelerates to pump oxygen-rich blood to your major muscle groups, your thighs, your chest, your shoulders. Your breathing turns shallow and rapid, your pupils dilate. Your body is optimizing itself to either sprint away from danger or engage in violent physical combat. In a survival scenario, fine motor skills are entirely useless. You do not need to sign a document or thread a needle while running from a bear. Consequently, your nervous system withdraws support from the delicate, intricate muscles in your hands and fingers. It sacrifices precision for raw power. Research into the autonomic nervous system indicates that elevated sympathetic nerve activity directly impairs the ability to perform fine motor skills and increases force fluctuations in hand muscles. When you look down and see your hands shaking, your brain interprets this lack of control as even more danger, which triggers even more adrenaline, which makes the shaking worse. You are caught in a destructive biological feedback loop. To break this loop, you must utilize the principle of rhythmic grounding. Do not try to force your hands to stop shaking through sheer willpower. Fighting the tremor requires tension, and tension amplifies the shaking. Instead, you must send a physical signal of safety back to your brain. Breathe deeply from your stomach, not your chest, to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the biological brake pedal that counteracts the adrenaline. If your hands are shaking, do not freeze them. Clench your fists tightly for 3 seconds, then let them fall completely limp. Redirect your focus from the tiny, delicate movement you are trying to perform and anchor your attention to a gross motor sensation, like the feeling of your feet pressing flat against the floor. When you remove the demand for perfection, the body stops treating the moment like a threat. The adrenaline recedes, the blood returns to your fingertips, the precision naturally comes back. We fail because we refuse to accept our biological limits. We believe that if we just push harder, care more, and grip tighter, we can override the chemistry of our own brains. But as the science clearly shows, over-arousal is the enemy of excellence. Greatness does not come from maximizing your stress. It comes from mastering the subtle art of staying calm while the world demands that you panic. But if the data proves that high pressure ruins our performance, why do we continue to torture ourselves? Why do we feel a deep, nagging guilt when a task is completed easily? The answer lies in a strange psychological glitch where our minds trick us into believing that if we are not suffering, we are not worthy of the reward. Chapter 3. The Sunk Cost of Suffering. You sit at your kitchen table. The clock reads 9 at night. You just finished a project that was supposed to take 3 weeks, but you figured out a brilliant shortcut. You completed it in 3 hours. You look at the finished work. It is flawless. But instead of feeling a rush of triumph, a heavy, sinking feeling settles in your stomach. Your chest feels tight. A voice in your head whispers that you cheated. You feel a strange, nagging guilt. Now imagine the opposite scenario. You stay up for 3 consecutive nights. Your eyes burn. Your back aches from hunching over your keyboard. You drink your 6th cup of coffee, your hands shaking as you type the final sentence. The final product is mediocre at best. But when you hit submit, you feel a massive surge of pride. You puff out your chest. You tell your co-workers how exhausted you are. The expectation is that we value the quality of our results. The reality is that we are biologically and culturally wired to value the amount of our suffering. You are sitting in a bad meeting. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Your boss is yelling about a minor mistake. Your stomach churns, and you clench your jaw so tight your teeth ache. You hate this job. You have hated it for 5 years. But when your friend texts you to ask if you are going to quit, you type back, "I can't. I've put too much blood, sweat and tears into this place to walk away now." We stay in toxic relationships. We remain in dead-end careers. We hold on to terrible investments. We do this because of a massive psychological glitch in the human brain. To understand this glitch, we have to look at a famous experiment from 1959 conducted by psychologists Elliot Aronson and Judson Mills. They wanted to understand why people join and stay in miserable groups. They invited a group of female college students to join a discussion club about the psychology of sex. But to get into the club, the women had to pass an initiation. The researchers split the women into different groups. One group had no initiation. Another group had a mild initiation, where they simply read a few neutral, everyday words aloud. But the third group faced a severe initiation. The researchers forced the women in this third group to read highly explicit, embarrassing and vulgar material out loud in front of a male researcher. After the initiations, all the women were allowed to listen in on the club's discussion. But the researchers played a trick. The discussion they listened to was completely fake. It was a pre-recorded audio tape of people talking about the mating habits of lower animals, and it was designed to be the most boring, dull, and monotonous conversation imaginable. Here is where the glitch in human psychology reveals itself. When the researchers asked the women to rate how much they enjoyed the discussion, the women who had no initiation or a mild initiation told the truth. They said the discussion was boring and worthless, but the women who went through the severe, embarrassing initiation rated the discussion as fascinating, dynamic, and highly valuable. In fact, they rated it significantly higher than the other groups. Why did they lie to themselves? They experienced a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, a theory originally developed by Leon Festinger. Cognitive dissonance is the severe mental discomfort you feel when your actions do not match your beliefs. For the women in the severe initiation group, their brains faced a terrifying conflict. On one side, they had just suffered through a humiliating, painful experience to join a group. On the other side, the group turned out to be completely worthless. The human brain cannot handle that contradiction. To admit that the group was boring meant admitting that their suffering was for absolutely nothing. So, to protect their egos, their brains altered reality. They retroactively convinced themselves that the boring discussion was actually brilliant. This specific defense mechanism is called effort justification. Effort justification dictates that when you put a massive amount of time, energy, or pain into something disappointing, you will artificially inflate the value of that thing to justify your pain. You convince yourself the terrible job is actually a great learning experience. You convince yourself the toxic partner is just misunderstood. You confuse the exhaustion of your effort with the actual value of the destination. The solution to this trap is implementing an audit of suffering. You must decouple the value of an outcome from the pain it took to get there. When evaluating a relationship, a job, or a project, ask yourself a single brutal question. If I woke up today with zero memory of the effort I put into this yesterday, would I still want it? If the answer is no, your effort is not building a future, your effort is just building a prison. But effort justification does not just trap us in bad social dynamics. It completely sabotages our logic when it comes to money, time, and daily decisions, trapping us in a cycle where we throw our future away just to honor our past. You buy a ticket to a 3-hour movie. You sit in the dark theater. After 45 minutes, you realize the movie is terrible. The plot makes no sense. The acting is wooden. Your legs cramp in the tight seat. You are bored out of your mind. What do? Do you stand up, walk out, and spend the next 2 hours doing something you actually enjoy? No. You shift in your seat, cross your arms, and force yourself to stare at the screen for 2 more hours. You tell yourself, I already paid $15 for the ticket. I have to get my money's worth. You just fell into the sunk cost fallacy. In 1985, researchers Hal Arkes and Catherine Bloomer published a landmark study on the psychology of sunk costs. They defined the sunk cost fallacy as our tendency to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made, regardless of the current reality. Arkes and Bloomer demonstrated this with a famous scenario. Imagine you buy a ticket for a ski trip to Michigan for $100. A few weeks later, you buy a ticket for a ski trip to Wisconsin for $50. You think the Wisconsin trip will be much more fun. Then you realize you accidentally booked both trips for the exact same weekend. You cannot return either ticket. The money is gone. Which trip do you choose? Logic dictates you should choose the Wisconsin trip because you believe it will be more enjoyable. The money is already gone either way, but in the study, the vast majority of people chose the Michigan trip. They chose the trip they knew they would enjoy less, simply because it cost more money. A sunk cost is an irretrievable expense. Like spilled milk, once it is gone, it is gone. A rational human being makes decisions based on the marginal benefits of the future. But because of our deep-seated aversion to loss, we make decisions based on the ghost of the past. You see this physical manifestation in the business world every day. A manager stares at a spreadsheet. The numbers are deep in the red. The company has poured $1 million into developing a new software product. The market has changed. Nobody wants the software anymore. The rational move is to shut the project down and build something new. Instead, the manager's chest tightens. The fear of admitting defeat washes over him. He bangs his fist on the desk and yells, "We cannot stop now! We already spent $1 million on this!" He then authorizes another $1 million to finish a product that will never make a single cent. You see this in relationships. You date someone for 3 years. The romance dies. You argue every night. You sleep back to back, gripping the edges of the mattress, miles apart in the same bed. But when you think about leaving, panic sets in. You think about the 3 years you already spent. You think about the shared apartment and the mutual friends. You stay, not because you see a happy future, but because you cannot bear to write off the past 3 years as a loss. The single good solution to break this cycle is the clean slate perspective. You must train your brain to separate past costs from future value. When making a decision about whether to stay or quit, you must mentally wipe the board clean. Assume you have invested absolutely nothing. Look only at the present moment and the probable future. If the movie is bad right now, spending 2 more hours in the theater will not bring your $15 back. It will only steal 2 hours of your life on top of the money. Stop trying to earn back the time you lost by spending more time making the same mistake. But where does this obsession with suffering and sunk costs come from? Why do we naturally assume that pain equals progress? The answer brings us to the toxic culture of the modern workplace, where we have been brainwashed into believing that destroying our own health is the only path to success. Walk into any modern office, or look at the social media feed of any aspiring entrepreneur. What do you see? You see dark circles under their eyes. You see people gripping energy drinks like oxygen masks. You see rapid, shallow breathing as they bounce their legs under their desks. You hear people bragging about their pain. I only slept 4 hours last night. I worked 80 hours this week. I haven't taken a weekend off in 2 years. We wear exhaustion as a badge of honor. We treat sleep deprivation as a competitive sport. We believe that the person who suffers the most, works the longest, and bleeds the hardest will naturally win the biggest prize. But the biological data and the economic reality prove that this is a complete delusion. The harder you push past your natural limits, the worse your output becomes, until your effort literally turns into negative value. To prove this, we turn to Stanford University economist John Pencavel. Pencavel wanted to find out exactly what happens to human output when we push our working hours to the extreme. He analyzed data and discovered a phenomenon known as the productivity cliff. The expectation is a straight line. If you work 40 hours, you produce 40 units of value. If you work 80 hours, you produce 80 units of value. The reality is a steep, brutal drop-off. Pencavel found that employee output remains relatively steady up to about 48 or 50 hours a week. But the moment a worker crosses that 50-hour mark, their productivity per hour begins to fall off a cliff. Their brains become sluggish. Their decision-making degrades. But the most shocking part of the Stanford study happens at the 55-hour mark. Once you work past 55 hours in a single week, your productivity basically drops to zero. Pencavel's data showed that a person who works 70 hours a week produces the exact same amount of total output as a person who works 55 hours a week. Let that sink in. Those extra 15 hours of grinding, sweating, and sacrificing your sleep produce absolutely nothing. You are sitting at your desk, staring at a glowing screen, typing words, and generating zero marginal value. In fact, you are likely doing negative work. Exhausted workers make more mistakes, have more accidents, and get sick more often. A tired brain writes bad code that needs to be fixed the next day. An exhausted manager snaps at an employee, destroying team morale. Long hours do not build empires. Long hours destroy brains and hearts. The World Health Organization found that working 55 hours or more a week is associated with a massive 35% higher risk of stroke and a 17% higher risk of dying from ischemic heart disease. You are literally killing yourself to produce performative busy work. The solution is the efficiency mandate. You must fundamentally change the metric you use to measure your self-worth. Stop measuring your days by the amount of hours you sat at a desk. Stop measuring your value by the depth of your exhaustion. Start measuring your days strictly by your output and your impact. If you write a brilliant chapter of a book in 2 hours, close the laptop. Do not force yourself to sit there for another 6 hours just to feel like you worked hard. Accept the guilt that comes with finishing early, and recognize that the guilt is just a phantom symptom of a sick culture. Protect your rest, because a well-rested brain doing 3 hours of deep, focused work will always obliterate a sleep-deprived brain doing 10 hours of frantic multitasking. Yet there is one final, complex layer to this trap. If extreme effort destroys us, why do some people genuinely seem to thrive on doing hard things? Why do people willingly run marathons until their feet bleed, or spend grueling hours building furniture when they could just buy it pre-assembled? You stand at the bottom of a steep mountain. The air is cold. The path is covered in jagged rocks. You could take a comfortable, heated gondola ride to the top in 10 minutes. Instead, you strap on heavy boots, grab a walking stick, and begin the brutal 3-hour climb. Your lungs burn. Your calf muscles scream. Sweat drips into your eyes, stinging them. You reach the summit, gasping for air. You look out over the valley. The view is exactly the same as the view from the gondola. Yet the view feels infinitely more beautiful because you suffered for it. This brings us to a concept known as the effort paradox, heavily studied by Michael Inslicht, a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. According to traditional models in cognitive psychology and economics, effort is purely a cost. Humans and animals naturally want to avoid effort whenever possible. But Inslicht's research reveals a profound contradiction. While we avoid effort, we also actively value it. Effort itself can add value to the outcome. We experience a sense of meaning, mastery, and purpose precisely because a task is difficult. When tasks are too easy, we feel bored. But overworking is also unhelpful. How do we find balance? The answer lies in your motivation and focus. When you push yourself to control things, like staying at a job you dislike, it takes a toll. But effort linked to personal growth becomes a beautiful reward. The runner climbing the mountain is not fighting the mountain. The runner climbs to grow. A helpful step is to review your current goals. Are you pushing a boulder because society told you to? Or because you genuinely want to see the top? If it feels like a heavy chore, let it go. If it feels like learning, keep going. But if we accept that rushing lowers our results, a big question remains. How do we do great things? If we stop pushing so hard, do we just become lazy? How do we reach success without forcing it? Ancient thinkers solved this puzzle. They found a natural way to reach greatness without stress. It might sound strange today. Chapter 4. The Art of Trying Not to Try. You sit at a nice restaurant. It is a first date. You want to seem smart, funny, and charming. You plan topics in your head. You sit so stiffly your back aches. When they speak, you're not really listening. Instead, you wait to deliver a clever reply. You force a laugh that sounds empty. Your date looks at their phone. The air turns awkward. We often think connection requires active pushing. We try to manufacture charm like a product, but people can easily sense what is not genuine. The harder you try, the more awkward you become. You cannot force yourself to be charming or funny. Why do we pause when trying to impress? A museum game offers a perfect lesson. Researcher Edward Slingerland points to a game called Mind Ball. 2 players sit at a table with a metal ball. Headbands measure their inner calmness. The goal is to move the ball into the other's goal. Normally, you would focus hard, but Mind Ball works differently. The senses measure deep peace, generated only when you are completely relaxed. The calmer you are, the more the ball moves away. Imagine playing it. The ball rolls toward you. You worry and tell yourself to relax. You close your eyes tight. You try to slow your breathing, but trying to relax takes effort, which pauses the calm state. The harder you try to stay calm, the faster you lose. Your own hurried effort causes the setback. Modern life is like Mind Ball. We rely on cool thinking, our logical, planning mind. We use it for math. But relationships and creativity need warm presence, fluid, easy action. Overthinking a date uses cool thinking in a warm setting. You build an inner wall. Your logical mind stalls your natural reactions. You follow a script instead of the real moment. The best solution is to lower that wall by shifting your focus outward. You cannot force charm. Stop judging yourself. Instead, focus entirely on the person in front of you. Listen to their voice. Notice their eyes. When you focus outward, your logical mind quiets and your natural rhythm shines. What happens inside us when we find this effortless rhythm? Why do we do better when we stop overthinking? Picture a master pianist on stage. She does not look at the keys. Her eyes look far away. Her fingers move beautifully, playing complex chords without hesitation. If asked to explain her finger placements, she will pause and stumble. Thinking about the details makes the magic fade. We used to think high performance required maximum mental energy. We assumed a state of ease meant the mind was fully lit up. The truth is the opposite. Great moments happen when a large part of your mind gently rests. In the early 2000s, researcher Arne Dietrich ran a long marathon through the warm woods. Moving through the trees, he felt no heat or leg tiredness. His worries and daily stresses completely vanished. He was in a pure state of ease. Dietrich realized that self-doubt and logical thinking were managed by the front center of the mind. He created a simple idea called the passing less front concept. Passing means temporary, less means less. Front is the area behind your forehead that acts as the inner worrier and planner. Dietrich suggested that during natural ease, the mind gently redistributes its energy. Because creative tasks need high power, the mind shifts energy away from the inner worrier. The voice that says, "You will mess up," quiets down. This beautifully surprises high achievers. You cannot overthink your way to greatness. The thinking part actually blocks the performance. Actively controlling your swing or speech brings tension back to the front center. You wake the inner worrier. You pause. The helpful solution is private preparation and public release, separate building a skill from using it. Use your logical mind at home to practice. Memorize the details, but when you step on stage, you must let go of active control. Trust your foundation, step out of your own way, and let your natural mind drive. Why do we still praise endless pushing? We treat releasing as a weakness. We think we must constantly push against the wall to open it. Long before we understood the mind, ancient Chinese thinkers discovered a better approach for success. They saw that the universe has a rhythm, and fighting it is stubborn. Imagine being in a rushing river. The water sweeps you away. Worry grips you. You turn and swim upstream. You move your arms and kick until you tire. Despite your heavy effort, you move backward. You tire yourself and stop. Now imagine stopping the fight and pointing your feet downstream. You let the water carry you. You gently paddle to steer around rocks to safety. The river and obstacles are the same. The difference is your approach. Taoist philosophers like Lao Tzu called this Wu Wei, meaning effortless action. Busy people might hear non-doing and feel tense, assuming it means sitting around waiting for a paycheck. They confuse releasing with giving up, but Wu Wei means making a wonderful impact with minimal friction, feeling wonderfully active yet effortless. Lao Tzu used a perfect metaphor: water. Water is the softest, most yielding substance. When water meets a boulder, it does not stop or try to break the rock. It does not argue. It does not exert violent force. It simply yields, bends, and flows around the obstacle, finding the path of least resistance. Yet, give that soft, yielding water enough time, and it will carve a canyon straight through solid mountain. Water achieves absolute destruction of the hardest materials on Earth, not by forcing the attack, but by persistently adhering to the natural laws of gravity and momentum. The British philosopher Alan Watts explained Wu Wei using the analogy of a sailor. A person who lives through forced, toxic effort is like a man in a rowboat. He grips the wooden oars until his hands blister. He fights against the wind and the tide, relying solely on the raw, finite power of his own muscles. He views nature as an enemy to conquer. A person practicing Wu Wei is like a sailor on a sailboat. The sailor does not fight the wind. He cooperates with it. He hoists a large piece of canvas and lets the immense, infinite power of nature do the heavy lifting. He does not use brute force. He uses intelligent alignment. When the wind changes direction, he does not yell at the sky. He shifts the sail. In our daily lives, we row against the current. We try to force business deals that clearly have no momentum. We try to force people to change their personalities to fit our desires. We try to force creative projects when our minds are completely exhausted. We measure our dedication by the size of the blisters on our hands. The final solution for this module is to align with the current. Stop trying to break the boulder. When you face massive resistance in a project or a relationship, take a step back and examine the flow of the environment. Are you trying to force a result that goes against the natural disposition of the people involved? Are you fighting the market? Are you fighting your own biology? Instead of forcing the outcome, focus entirely on creating the right conditions. A farmer cannot grab a stalk of wheat, pull it upward with his hands, and force it to grow faster. If he pulls the plant, he rips the roots out of the dirt and destroys his crop. The farmer's only job is to provide water, clear the weeds, and ensure good soil. He creates the environment, steps back, and lets the natural process do the work. Apply this to your work. Do not try to force a brilliant idea out of your tired brain. Go for a walk, sleep 8 hours, and engage in a different hobby. Create the environment for your unconscious mind to process the information, and the brilliant idea will naturally surface while you take a shower. Stop trying to pull the plant. Removing your ego and aligning with the current helps you glide effortlessly through your work, your art, and your social life. But there is a hidden, dangerous trap waiting for you the second you apply this philosophy to your deepest personal desires. Everything changes when you stop trying to achieve external goals and start chasing the ultimate human objective: happiness. Because the human mind features a biological mechanism specifically designed to ensure you never stay happy for long. And if you do not understand how it works, the pursuit of joy will destroy your life. Chapter 5. The hedonic treadmill. You stare at the glowing screen of your phone in the dark. The email confirms the deposit. The money is in your account. For 5 years, you told yourself that reaching this exact financial milestone would finally cure your anxiety. You log into your banking app, you see the numbers, your heart beats faster. A rush of pure euphoria spreads through your chest. You smile until your cheeks ache. You sleep that night feeling like you conquered the world. 2 weeks pass. You wake up on a Tuesday. The money still sits in the bank. Yet you feel a familiar tightness in your chest. The alarm sounds, and you drag yourself out of bed with the same heavy reluctance you felt a month ago. The euphoria evaporated. You look in the mirror, and the exact same anxieties stare back at you. You wonder what went wrong. You decide you just need the next promotion. The expectation is that a monumental positive event will permanently alter our baseline of joy. The reality is that human biology treats intense happiness not as a permanent destination, but as an emergency state that must be neutralized. To understand why our brains erase our own joy, we turn to a groundbreaking psychological study from 1978 conducted by Philip Brickman, Dan Coates, and Ronnie Janoff-Bullman. These researchers wanted to measure how extreme life events alter human happiness. They tracked down 2 distinct groups of people who experienced the absolute extremes of human fortune. The first group consisted of major lottery winners. These people experienced an event that society universally views as the ultimate ticket to permanent happiness. The second group consisted of people who had recently suffered devastating, paralyzing accidents, leaving them as paraplegics. If you ask anyone on the street to predict the emotional states of these 2 groups a year after their respective events, the answer seems obvious. The lottery winners should float on a cloud of permanent bliss. The accident victims should remain trapped in a state of eternal despair. The researchers discovered a terrifying truth about human nature. After the initial shock of the events wore off, both groups eventually returned to their previous baseline levels of everyday happiness. The lottery winners reported that the thrill of the money faded. Even worse, the extreme spike in dopamine from winning millions of dollars actually damaged their ability to enjoy simple everyday pleasures. Watching television, eating a good meal, or talking with a friend no longer registered as enjoyable because their brains compared everything to the massive high of the lottery win. Meanwhile, the accident victims, despite their severe physical limitations, adapted to their new reality. They found joy in small victories, rebuilt their routines, and returned to a stable emotional baseline. Psychologists call this biological mechanism hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill. Imagine running on a physical treadmill. You can sprint as fast as your legs allow. You sweat, your lungs burn, and you exert massive effort. But no matter how fast you run, you stay in the exact same spot. Your brain operates the same way. When you buy a new car, your brain releases a flood of dopamine. But within weeks, your neural receptors adapt to the new stimulus. The shiny new car becomes just a normal piece of metal you use to drive to the grocery store. The thrill vanishes. You want a better car. Research by positive psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky and her colleagues provides further insight into this mechanism. They propose that roughly 50% of our happiness baseline is hardwired by our genetics. Another 10% is dictated by our life circumstances, our income, our housing, our geographic location. This means that the external things we spend our entire lives chasing, the house, the job title, the bank balance, account for a shockingly tiny fraction of our overall emotional well-being. The single good solution to the hedonic treadmill is the practice of strategic deprivation. You cannot outrun your own biological adaptation. If you constantly feed yourself high-level pleasures, your baseline will continually rise, leaving you permanently numb. You must intentionally interrupt your comfort, take a cold shower, fast for a day, sleep on the floor once a month, walk to the store in the rain instead of driving. By manually resetting your baseline through voluntary discomfort, you train your brain to stop taking your baseline luxuries for granted. You break the treadmill by stepping off it entirely. But what happens when we stop chasing physical things and start chasing the abstract emotion of happiness itself? You walk into a bookstore and see entire walls dedicated to the pursuit of joy. You buy a journal to track your daily moods. You write down affirmations on sticky notes and place them on your bathroom mirror. You monitor your own smile. You ask yourself multiple times a day, am I feeling happy right now? When a minor inconvenience occurs, a flat tire, a spilled coffee, a rude comment from a coworker, you feel a deep sense of failure. You tell yourself you are failing at being happy. The pressure to feel good becomes a crushing weight on your shoulders. We assume that making happiness our primary goal guarantees we will achieve it. The reality proves that treating happiness as a measurable objective is the fastest way to destroy it. In 2011, a team of researchers led by psychologist Iris Maus investigated the consequences of valuing happiness. They wanted to know if people who desperately want to be happy actually achieve their goal. The findings exposed a brutal psychological paradox. The researchers discovered that people who place a high value on happiness are significantly more likely to feel lonely, dissatisfied, and exhibit higher symptoms of depression. Maus and her colleagues explained that people who highly value happiness set impossible emotional standards for themselves. When they face a situation that should make them feel good, like a birthday party or a vacation, they monitor their internal state. They ask themselves, am I having enough fun? Am I as happy as I should be? The very act of evaluating your happiness creates a cognitive distance from the present moment. You cannot experience a moment and evaluate the moment at the exact same time. The evaluation requires the analytical part of your brain to activate, which instantly kills the spontaneous emotion. Imagine sitting in a movie theater watching a comedy. You laugh until your stomach hurts. You are completely absorbed in the story. Now, imagine watching the same movie, but holding a clipboard and a pen. Your job is to grade your own laughter every 5 minutes on a scale of 1 to 10. You stare at the clipboard. You analyze the joke. You think about your breathing. You do not laugh once. The clipboard ruined the comedy. When you make happiness a goal, you walk through life carrying an emotional clipboard. You set an impossible standard of constant euphoria, and when your natural human baseline of neutrality returns, you experience deep disappointment. You interpret a normal, quiet Tuesday as a catastrophic failure. The one good solution to this trap is to practice emotional neutrality. Stop taking your emotional temperature. Throw away the clipboard. When you feel a negative emotion, do not panic. Do not treat sadness, boredom, or frustration as diseases that require immediate medication or positive affirmations. Let the negative emotion exist. Acknowledge the frustration of a flat tire without adding a layer of guilt for not being happy about it. When you remove the pressure to be constantly joyful, the anxiety surrounding your emotional state evaporates, making room for genuine peace. If chasing external rewards leaves us numb on the treadmill and chasing internal happiness leaves us depressed and disappointed, how do we actually live a fulfilling life? We return to a quiet room. You sit in a wooden chair. A heavy textbook rests on the desk in front of you. Your eyes burn from reading. Your neck aches. You have spent the last 4 hours studying for a difficult exam. You missed a party with your friends. You ate a cold sandwich for dinner. You feel exhausted, stressed, and isolated. By any standard metric of immediate happiness, you are miserable. Yet, deep in your chest, beneath the fatigue, you feel a profound, solid sense of rightness. You feel anchored. You know that every painful hour of study builds the foundation for a career where you will build a better future. Modern society confuses two distinct psychological concepts: hedonic pleasure and eudaimonic well-being. Hedonic pleasure is the pursuit of positive feelings and the avoidance of pain. It is the dopamine hit from eating sugar, buying a watch, or receiving a like on a photograph. It is fragile, temporary, and subject to rapid biological adaptation. Eudaimonia is an ancient concept often translated as human flourishing. It is the pursuit of meaning, virtue, and purpose. Eudaimonic well-being does not require you to feel good in the moment. In fact, it often demands deep sacrifice, frustration, and suffering. Raising a child, writing a book, building a business, or caring for a sick relative are rarely fun activities in the present tense. They involve sleepless nights, massive financial stress, and endless worry. But when a person anchors their life to eudaimonic meaning, they become immune to the hedonic treadmill. They stop demanding that the universe provide them with a constant stream of euphoria. The 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill recognized this paradox perfectly. He observed that only those people who fix their minds on an objective other than their own happiness actually end up experiencing true joy. They aim at something else: the improvement of their craft, the care of their family, the service of their community, and they find happiness, by the way, as a natural byproduct of their actions. When you aim directly at the target of happiness, you miss. When you aim at the target of meaning, the arrow strikes the center of joy on its own. The one core solution here is to adopt the responsibility metric. You must permanently abandon the question, "What will make me happy today?" Replace it with a far heavier, far more powerful question: "What responsibility can I carry today?" Look at the burdens in your life, your work, your family, your community. Choose to bear those burdens with competence and grace. When you focus entirely on being useful, on solving complex problems, and on carrying the weight of duty, the frantic desperation to feel good disappears. The emptiness vanishes. You build a life so rich in meaning that a temporary bad mood no longer terrifies you. Now that we understand the biological traps of forced effort, the neurochemical disaster of over-arousal, the sunk cost illusion of useless suffering, and the paradox of chasing happiness, we arrive at a final crossroads. We possess the tools to rewire our daily actions, but none of these tools will work if we refuse to confront the single foundational fear that drives all of our frantic behavior. We exhaust ourselves, fight the current, and demand happiness because we are terrified of what happens if we lose control. We want absolute certainty in an uncertain world. The final shift in our journey is both the simplest to understand and the hardest to execute, because achieving true freedom requires us to step directly into the dark, empty space of the unknown and embrace the one thing we spend our entire lives trying to avoid. Chapter 6. The Wisdom of Insecurity. You stand at the edge of a high diving board. The water sits 10 feet below. You want to jump, but your brain demands a guarantee. You want to know exactly how the water will feel against your skin. You want to calculate the exact angle your body will break the surface. You want to measure the temperature, the splash radius, and the depth. You freeze. Your toes curl tight around the rough fiberglass edge. Your chest restricts your breath to short, shallow gasps. You refuse to move your feet until you possess absolute certainty. The expectation dictates that gathering more information and building a perfect plan guarantees safety. The reality dictates that the universe refuses to provide a script, and your desperate demand for a guarantee is the exact mechanism paralyzing your life. Every year, millions of people sit down at a wooden desk on January 1st to draft a life plan. You buy a fresh, expensive notebook. You press a heavy pen against the crisp white paper. You map out the next 5 years of your existence. You decide the exact month you will secure a promotion. You decide the exact year you will purchase a home. You calculate the specific amount of money you need in your retirement account by age 40. You draw rigid timelines, constructing straight arrows pointing from one achievement to the next. You build a massive, complex mental fortress of predictability. When life deviates from this rigid plan by a single inch, your biology rebels. Your heart pounds against your ribs. Your stomach churns, producing a hollow, sickening ache. Your breathing turns shallow. You feel a massive wave of panic because you believe you lost control. We believe that predicting the future protects us from failure. We assume that the smartest, most successful individuals in the world, the elite investors, the political leaders, the corporate executives, operate with clear foresight. We think they possess a crystal ball, and if we just analyze enough data, we can build a crystal ball for ourselves. To dismantle this dangerous illusion, we must examine a 20-year research project conducted by Philip Tetlock, a prominent researcher and professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Tetlock wanted to know if the experts we see on television, the political pundits in tailored suits, the loud economic analysts, the seasoned intelligence officers, actually possess the ability to predict the future. He gathered a large group of these highly paid professionals and asked them to make tens of thousands of specific predictions. He asked them about the rise and fall of foreign economies, the outcomes of tense political elections, and the probability of global conflicts. Then he waited years to see how their confident predictions actually played out in reality. The results shattered the cultural myth of prediction. Tetlock found that the average expert was roughly as accurate as a dart-throwing chimpanzee. Their rigid, highly educated forecasts performed little better than random, blind guessing. But Tetlock discovered something far more terrifying about human psychology. The experts who were the most famous, the most confident on television, and the most rigid in their beliefs actually performed the worst. He categorized these highly confident experts using a concept developed by philosopher Isaiah Berlin: hedgehogs. A hedgehog is a person who views the entire complex world through the lens of one single, rigid, defining idea. When a hedgehog builds a forecast, they filter out any new information that contradicts their grand theory. If the global market shifts and their prediction fails, they do not change their minds. They invent an excuse, raise their voices, and grip their original theory with white knuckles. When you demand absolute certainty in your own personal life, you transform yourself into a hedgehog. You build a rigid 5-year plan. When the economy shifts and you lose your job, or an unexpected illness strikes your family, or a long-term relationship ends, your rigid plan shatters. Because you relied entirely on predicting a specific future, you built no capacity to adapt to a messy present. The relentless demand for certainty makes you fragile. Tetlock found that the only individuals who demonstrated real skill in navigating the unknown future were a group he called foxes. Foxes do not believe in absolute certainty. They know the world is chaotic, noisy, and unpredictable. They gather many small, diverse pieces of information. They constantly update their beliefs the moment new evidence arrives on their desk. They do not arrogantly predict. They humbly calculate probabilities, and they remain completely willing to abandon a failing plan without a shred of ego. The one good solution to the forecasting trap is the probability pivot. You must stop asking, "What will definitely happen?" and start asking, "What is the most likely outcome right now, and how will I pivot if the data changes?" Tear up the rigid, unbending 5-year plan. Replace it with a compass. A map claims to show every single rock and ditch for the next 100 miles. A compass simply points you to true north. When you stop demanding a perfect map, a sudden roadblock no longer triggers a panic attack. It simply becomes a new, immediate puzzle to solve. We try to secure our lives not just by mapping decades into the future, but by micromanaging every tiny detail of our daily environment. You send an important text message to a friend. You set the phone on the table. An hour passes. They do not reply. You pick the phone back up. You see the tiny read receipt resting beneath your message. Your throat closes tight. Your foot taps a frantic, uncontrollable rhythm against the floorboards. You construct the worst-case scenario in your mind. You assume they harbor deep anger toward you. You assume the friendship is ruined. To neutralize this agonizing feeling of ambiguity, you type 3 more text messages, demanding a response, demanding clarity. We believe that avoiding ambiguity keeps us safe. We believe that if we can just eliminate all the question marks in our daily lives, our anxiety will disappear. Clinical research into the biological architecture of anxiety proves that the exact opposite is true. The more you try to scrub uncertainty from your life, the more hypersensitive your nervous system becomes to it. Psychologists study a specific cognitive trait called intolerance of uncertainty. It measures exactly how deeply a person fears the unknown. For decades, many assumed that people with severe anxiety disorders simply experienced more objectively stressful events than the average person. But clinical data reveals a different mechanism entirely. Comprehensive research, including meta-analyses of patients suffering from generalized anxiety disorder, demonstrates that an intolerance of uncertainty functions as the primary core driver of chronic worry. A study monitoring patients with severe generalized anxiety disorder found that an intolerance of uncertainty accounts for a massive portion of the variance in a person's daily worry levels. When your brain refuses to tolerate a question mark, it treats every ambiguous situation as a literal physical threat. An unread email produces the exact same surge of cortisol as a predator snapping a twig in the dark. Imagine you live in a large house and you decide you never want to feel the sensation of being cold. You walk to the thermostat and turn the heat up to 80 degrees. You seal the edges of the windows with thick tape. You never step outside. For a while, you feel perfectly comfortable, but your physical body adapts to the extreme artificial heat. One afternoon, the tape peels back, a window cracks open, and a mild 60-degree breeze blows into your living room. Because you ruthlessly eliminated all exposure to the cold, your body lacks any natural defense mechanism. You shiver violently, your teeth chatter uncontrollably, the mild breeze feels like a freezing, fatal blizzard. When you seek endless reassurance, when you double-check the locks on your front door 5 times before bed, when you obsessively refresh your bank account balance, when you refuse to apply for a new job because the outcome lacks a guarantee, you are turning up the thermostat. You are shrinking your comfort zone until it fits inside a closet. The data shows that psychological therapies specifically designed to slowly increase a patient's tolerance for uncertainty yield massive, lasting reductions in clinical anxiety and depression. These treatments do not cure the anxiety by giving the patient a safe, predictable space. They cure the anxiety by taking the patient outside and teaching them how to stand comfortably in the cold wind. Furthermore, an intolerance of uncertainty actively destroys positive human experiences. Recent studies demonstrate that people who demand constant certainty exhibit far lower levels of natural curiosity and significantly lower levels of subjective happiness. You cannot experience the joy of discovery if you demand to know what sits inside the box before you open it. The single good solution to this biological trap is controlled exposure. You must actively introduce small, deliberate doses of ambiguity into your weekly routine. Send an email and consciously refuse to check your inbox for a reply for 24 hours. Walk into a restaurant and order a meal without reading a single online review first. Drive a different route to your office without checking the digital traffic application. When your chest tightens and your mind screams for a guarantee, sit still. Let the discomfort wash over your skin. Do not fix it. Do not reach for the phone. Over time, your nervous system will learn a profound lesson. A question mark is not a lion hiding in the bushes. It is just a question mark. Even if we learn to accept small, daily ambiguities, we still face the ultimate crushing terror of human existence, the passage of time, the reality of aging, and the inevitability of profound loss. You look in the bathroom mirror under harsh lighting and notice a new line etched into your forehead. Your stomach drops. You purchase expensive cosmetic creams. You attempt to freeze your physical appearance in place. You attempt to freeze your relationships as well. You grip the people you love with a suffocating, jealous intensity, terrified that time will eventually pull them away from your side. We believe that holding on tight prevents us from losing what we currently possess. We assume that if we just exert enough emotional force, we can grab the hands of the clock and stop them from moving. The British philosopher Alan Watts recognized this tragic flaw in human nature and explored it deeply in his landmark book, The Wisdom of Insecurity. Watts observed that the entire universe operates on a fundamental principle of constant, unstoppable change. Everything flows like a powerful river. The tension arises from our arrogant, desperate refusal to accept this flow. Watts pointed out a terrifying truth. Human beings are kicked off the edge of a precipice the exact moment they are born. We are all falling through space. But instead of opening our eyes, looking around, and experiencing the wind during the fall, we spend our entire lives frantically grasping at rocks falling right next to us. We grab onto wealth. We grab onto social status. We grab onto the illusion of a permanent, unchanging identity. We grip these falling rocks so hard that our fingers cramp and our hands bleed, believing that if we hold on to the rock tightly enough, we will magically stop falling. Watts tied this existential dread directly to the law of reversed effort. As we explored in earlier chapters, Thrashing to stay on the surface of the quicksand makes you sink. What's noted that when you try to hold your breath to save it, you immediately lose it. The absolute core of human anxiety is the desperate, exhausting attempt to lock down a universe that fundamentally refuses to sit still. Consider the physical nature of music. A beautiful symphony requires a progression of changing notes. If a musician presses a single key on a piano and holds it down continuously, refusing to let the note fade away because it sounds so beautiful, it ceases to be music. It just becomes a long, annoying, monotonous noise. Music only exists because the notes vanish. When you demand that a romantic relationship never evolves or changes, you suffocate the relationship. When you demand that your physical body never ages, you spend your remaining years in a state of bitter vanity, mourning a past you can never retrieve. The desperate obsession with securing your life creates a permanent state of insecurity. You spend every waking hour guarding your treasures, pacing back and forth, terrified of the inevitable thief of time. The single good solution here is to embrace the fall. You must consciously open your hands and drop the falling rocks. Acceptance is not an act of cowardly defeat. It is the ultimate expression of courage. When you fully accept that your job is temporary, that your youth is fleeting, and that every single day is merely a brief spark of light between two massive eternities of darkness, a crushing psychological weight vanishes from your shoulders. You stop fighting gravity. When you stop bracing your neck and spine for the impact, your muscles finally relax. You gain the freedom to look at the beautiful view as you fall. If we abandon our rigid 5-year plans, stop avoiding daily uncertainty, and let go of the illusion of permanence, a glaring question remains. How do we survive? If we do not build a thick concrete fortress to protect ourselves, will the violent storms of life not just wash us away into the ocean? You sit in a sterile doctor's office. The harsh fluorescent light hums above you. The doctor looks up from a clipboard and delivers terrible news. A sudden illness, a massive, life-altering disruption. Your palms sweat. A heavy, cold knot forms in your stomach. The ground disappears beneath your feet. If you built your life like a massive concrete fortress, relying entirely on guarantees and perfect health, this moment shatters your walls. Concrete is incredibly strong, but it is entirely rigid. When a massive earthquake hits, a concrete wall cannot bend. It cracks, it splinters, and it collapses entirely, crushing everything inside. People who rely on rigid certainty experience absolute psychological destruction when life hits them with an unavoidable tragedy. The scientific and psychological community has a specific term for the antidote to this rigidity. They call it psychological flexibility. It serves as the core mechanism behind a highly effective clinical framework known as acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. For decades, many therapists tried to help patients by teaching them how to aggressively control their negative thoughts, how to forcefully avoid stress, and how to build thick mental walls. ACT flipped this entire paradigm upside down. Extensive clinical data reveals that attempting to avoid emotional pain, a mechanism researchers call experiential avoidance, actually amplifies the suffering. When you run away from sadness, the sadness chases you, growing larger and more terrifying with every step. Psychological flexibility is the ability to remain fully connected to the present moment, experiencing whatever painful, uncomfortable emotions arise, while continuing to move forward toward your core values. A study examining medical students facing immense crushing academic pressure found that a brief intervention focusing strictly on psychological flexibility significantly decreased their severe anxiety and stress. It achieved this not by making the medical exams easier, but by decreasing their distress aversion and significantly increasing their distress endurance. Another study focusing on diagnosed cancer patients demonstrated that psychological flexibility directly mediated the relationship between resilience and mental health, buffering them against profound depression and fear during their brutal treatments. The clinical data paints a clear picture. True resilience is not the complete absence of fear. True resilience is the capacity to carry the heavy weight of fear with you while you continue to walk forward. People with high psychological flexibility do not build concrete fortresses. They build rafts. A concrete fortress fights the water. A raft rises and falls with the water. When a massive wave of grief, job loss, or illness crashes into a raft, the raft does not break. It absorbs the violent momentum. It bobs aggressively. It takes on a little water. The wood creaks under the pressure, but it always floats back to the surface. The final, actionable solution of this framework is to build a raft. Stop trying to engineer a synthetic life where you never feel pain or uncertainty. You do not control the ocean. You only control the wood you use to build your vessel. To build this raft, you must permanently separate your core identity from the rapidly changing circumstances of your daily life. Anchor your identity not to a specific job title on your resume or a specific number in your bank account or a specific relationship, but to your internal values. If your core value is curiosity, you can practice curiosity whether you are a wealthy corporate executive or a broke university student. If your core value is compassion, you can practice compassion whether you are running a marathon in perfect health or lying in a hospital bed attached to machines. When your internal values remain your unshakable compass, the terrifying unpredictability of the outside world permanently loses its power over you. You no longer need to thrash violently against the quicksand. You no longer need to force your brain past its biological limits until you collapse. You no longer need to stay in miserable situations just to prove your worth. You no longer need to run on a treadmill chasing a chemical high, and you no longer need to demand a perfect guarantee from a chaotic universe. The harder you try to fight the natural rhythm of life, the worse it gets. The moment you let go, the current catches you, and you finally begin to move. You finally stop thrashing in the quicksand, but merely letting go isn't enough to escape the gravity of average. Most people step out of the trap only to fall asleep on the shore. To discover the invisible psychological forces keeping you painfully average, click the video on your screen right now.